This
reliable.
conference will now be recorded.
Hey, thanks, Sibs. So, like we said, high quality data is comprehensive and reliable. And like we'll talk about a lot throughout this presentation, the data in HMIS is really a representation of how our system works and how our system functions to people at all levels of government and implementation. So it's important that it is high quality. So when we're talking about the elements of high quality data, we're talking about three different things: accuracy, completeness, and timeliness. And we'll kind of walk through what each one of those means now. So first, accuracy, just making sure that the data we're putting into HMIS is consistent and truthful. When we're talking about consistency, we're talking about, following the standardized procedures that are set out for us by HUD and by Homeward, our HMIS implementer. So when you have questions about, how do I answer a certain question in HMIS, or what is this specific data element looking for, that's an answer you can find within the HUD HMIS Data Standards Manual. And if you have a question that's more like, what is the expectation for me in terms of timeliness of my data, or kind of the very particular ways that you're putting in data into that's a question that you'll likely find answered within the HCIS policies and procedures, which we'll talk about a little bit more on the next few slides. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about consistency, making sure we're following the standards that are set out to us by different governing bodies. When we're talking about truthful, just generally making sure that the data in our system reflects the services and the situation of the client. Pretty self-explanatory. Data isn't really helpful if it's not actually, giving us some insight into the reality of the person and the system which it's describing. So next, completeness. Of course, the goal is having as little missing data as possible so we can get as full of a picture as possible. And like we talked about on the previous slide, the HCIS policies and procedures actually mandates certain levels of, allowable missing data and allowable, don't know or refused answers. So for street outreach projects, the allowable kind of threshold of missing data or, don't know or refused answers is 10%. For all other projects that are putting in data into HMIS, those numbers drop to 2% and 3%, with a little leeway for, Social Security number answers. So that is our expectations for data completeness. Lastliness, data timeliness. The goal here is just entering data as soon as possible, just so that our system is up to date and current on what our system looks like in the moment. Again, we have standards set out for us by Homeward, by our HMIS implementer of what the timeliness standard is. So for coordinated assessment projects, that standard is same day entry. Of course, it's a little easier for coordinated assessment because we do have those, auto-filling logs. So that makes it easier for you guys in terms of timeliness. For all other projects, the expectation is 3 days. So within 3 days of learning new information or intaking a client, we are expecting that you're able to get that information into HMIS within that time period. So that's a little bit on what data quality is. Now the bigger question is, why is that important for us? Why is data quality important for us? And to start off this section just with an example from our own system, this is actually a screenshot from an HMIS report that details the length of time to housing for people in our rapid rehousing projects in 2016. And as you can see in the highlighted portion, it's reporting that the average time to housing for people within our projects in 2016 was 6 days. Now, this would be great if it were the case, but I think we know the constraints of our system and the constraints of our community, plus the background context that we have. That 2016, that was a while ago. HMIS was new to us, and we were still getting used to what certain terms meant and what certain data elements was. So we kind of had the context to understand that this 6-day number that HMIS reporting might not be an accurate representation of how our system was working in the moment. However, somebody who doesn't have the context that we have, somebody who doesn't work in our system, if they see this number, they're going to take it at face value and think that, average 6 days in the FRCoC. So this kind of brings us to a point that we really want to emphasize about the importance of data quality, especially in HMIS. So the data that is in HMIS is really a direct representation of how our system works and functions, both to us internally who are within the COC and to people who don't work with the COC, don't know the context of our community, and don't have any frame of reference for what we're doing other than the numbers that they're seeing in HMIS. So just to give a little more context on all the range of things that data is used for from HMIS, we're using it to understand problems and trends, using it to demonstrate our good work, again, to ourselves and to people who don't work in our community and don't have the context of the work that we're doing. We're also using it to measure outcomes and inform system changes, and we're using it to measure progress towards ending homelessness. And a little side note as well as to what HMIS can be used for, there is a function that can allow you to have a dashboard on your homepage so that as soon as you're logging into HMIS, the first thing you see is a personalized count of entries, exits, and other case manager specific or program specific counts, so that can be a resource for you to help keep track of your caseload or your workload at any given moment. And if this were actually HMIS, we'd be able to click on the numbers and see the specific individuals that they're counting. So this is another way that we can use data and use HMIS to our advantage. And if you have questions about how to set this up, you're free to email me and I can walk you through the process. But I did want to highlight that in case anybody wasn't aware of that functionality yet. Yeah, but past just internal uses of HMIS, we also have others who are evaluating our data. So on a local level, the COC board and committees are pulling data from HMIS to understand how our system is working, to inform decisions around system planning and system evaluation. And on the state and federal level, we have, again, a range of organizations and entities that are looking at our data. DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, is looking at data that's pulled from HMIS to determine, levels of state funding that we will receive. HUD is doing the same thing on the federal level, so determining the amount of federal funds that our COC will receive based on our performance. And lastly, US Congress is actually looking at COC data as well to understand trends in homelessness throughout the country and to use that to inform homelessness policy. So the data in HMIS does have a wide range of implications for the work that we're doing as a COC. So now that we kind of have some background into what data quality is and why it's important, now we can talk about the small steps that we can do to promote data quality within our system. So there are, a few different roles in our system in regards to HMIS usage and data quality. So we've kind of broken it down by level here. So first we have COC staff. Sam and I and our intern and any additional people we might be bringing on in the next few months. It's our job to, make sure that we're, have a data quality plan and communicating that with the people that we're working with, the HMIS users in our community. We're also monitoring HMIS usage, and I know Sam has been in contact with people in cases where the data in HMIS doesn't match up with what's really happening within programs. So that's one way we support data quality as well. And lastly, training and support. We are here to help you as much as possible. When Sam is on maternity leave, I'll be the point of contact for you all for any questions you might have about HMIS. And if I can't answer the question directly, I am in contact with a small network of other HMIS administrators within our area. So if I can't answer it, I will have some resources at my disposal to get an answer to you all. So just in the future, if you have any questions about HMIS, I'll be your point of contact. Now, on the program level, it will be up to programs to make sure that there is some sort of daily HMIS workflow that's customized to your program and to the clients you serve and to the type of work you're doing to ensure that there is time and there is a convenient way to access HMIS and make sure that you get and beautiful data collection processes. There is a local standard in place to make sure that you are collecting the data that is necessary to be put into HMIS. And lastly, another level of monitoring, making sure that people are in compliance with the standards and reaching out in any cases where the standards may be unclear. And lastly, for users, for all of us, client communication will be one priority in emphasizing data quality, making sure that it's clear to your clients about why you're collecting certain points of information and clear to them like who actually will have access to their individual data, not necessarily their aggregated data that nobody can assign to a person, but those concerns about privacy, making sure that you're able to talk about those with your clients as well will be important. Data entry, again, the pillars of data quality like that we talked about, accuracy, timeliness, and completeness will be something to think about. And lastly, understanding the requirements that we've talked about today in terms of what's expected in terms of the different standards of data quality, again, that we've talked about with timeliness, accuracy, and completeness. So those are some key roles in data quality. I'll turn it to Sam now to talk about some solutions to common data quality issues in our system.
Thanks, Aisha. Just to follow up on what Aisha was talking about data quality, some things that the COC is currently doing to help assist with your data quality is around data quality reports. So on a regular basis, well, not so regular lately, but on a regular basis, we do send out data quality reports about whether or not there is missing pieces of data. Accompanying that is usually some things that I've been able to catch around accuracy. So those usually get sent out to each of the individual organizations, and then the organizations figure out who's the point person to make any data corrections. Those are super important, mostly because right now we've been sending them out in regards to reports. So any fixes that we are requesting of you usually ties to a larger report that we are trying to submit, and we want to make sure that we are capturing all of the wonderful things that you guys do accurately. And so even though on a day-to-day basis it doesn't feel like data quality means much to you guys, it's really important in me being able to be really good at my job about getting you guys funding and support that you guys need. and showcasing how wonderful Fredericksburg is at preventing and ending homelessness. I can tell you right now, even in the last year with COVID in particular, we've been able to show mass amounts of people moving into housing and people being sheltered who were otherwise unsheltered. And so all of the hard work that you guys have done has made waves across the state about what we've been able to showcase and what can be done with increased funding from COVID. And none of that is possible unless I'm able to get access to your data. So you guys putting in all the things that you do actually helps me paint the story for the state and for our localities about all the wonderful things that you guys do. I do want to pause just for a second to make sure, is there any questions for Aisha or I around data quality? All right. If you don't want to ask it here in front of all of us, it's fine. You can always shoot Aisha and I an email as well. Aisha does work with us full time, and so she'll be able to respond. My last day is set for next Friday, so after that, I will not be responding to your emails. So just please make sure that you're tagging Aisha. She does a wonderful job around HMIS, and if you ever need any help, even getting reports or any other kind of numbers for anything that you guys are doing, Aisha is our HMIS data guru. So she's happy to help any way that she can. All right, so what I'm going to focus on is the not so fun part, and I don't mean it to sound like I'm lecturing you, but I just want to make sure that it was said so that you can just know for future reference. Mine surrounds more around, here's the common issues that we see in our data quality and in reports that I'm running that I often spend my time fixing. And so if I can help you understand kind of what we're looking at, then you're able to kind of make my job easier. So Aisha, will you run through the slides for me? Thank you. So the first thing I just want to mention is fixing versus updating. All of our data is captured over time. So we really want to make sure that anything that you're putting in, if it's the correct data, gets captured for that point in time, even if it changes later on. So for instance, when it comes to someone's income, we want to make sure that we are capturing what their income was at the beginning of their project stay with you, what it is in the middle if it ends up changing, and then what it is at the end. Really, our goal is to look at what impact your project and your interaction with someone had on someone's life. So for income, we want to help increase someone's income if we're able to, in order to have them sustain their housing on their own. So if you enter incorrect data, meaning that you accidentally clicked the wrong box or selected the wrong option for some sort of piece of data, then you are able to fix it. You're able to go back into entry records using the pencils next to those dates, or go back into your updates using the pencils next to those, and you're actually able to change those data points that are incorrect and need to be corrected. Now, if there is new information or information has changed, then you want to make sure that you're using interim review. And so I'm going to just show you where that is so that you're able to see it. So Aisha, I'm just going to take over for just 1 second. So this is our test client, Centraliza Testa. If you look at Centraliza and you were to enter her into a project, if you needed to make an update because now something has changed, interims is where you end up doing that. So you've entered all of her data about where she is at the start of your project. If you needed to fix it, you can click the pencil and you can go back to that data and correct anything that you need to correct. That's what we just talked about. But if her income ends up changing, you need to make an update. Just make sure that you're using interim and you're creating an update so that the next period of time now transfers over and you're able to make any updates from this screen. The only options that come forward for you are the options that would update. And so you'll notice things around their demographics and things around their chronic homeless status or their place that they were staying before they came to your project aren't included, and that's because that already took place at the beginning or those things don't change over time. The only thing that's included on here is your things that might change. In addition, for our housing projects, the update page is the only time in which you're able to access the housing move-in date. So you have to do an update in order to enter a housing move-in date. So I just wanted to be really clear about making sure you understood the difference between fixing versus updating. Is there
Sam,
any?
can I ask a quick question about that?
Sure.
So let's say somebody comes to Respite and I noticed that during my assessment I had some incorrect data. Let's say I notice it, say, a week later, when I go to fix the data, let's say I realize I meant to put in 100 and I put in 10. If I'm fixing that data, do I backdate?
So I will always say backdating is a great idea.
Okay.
However, if you go into the pencil for their entry record, it automatically backdates you to whatever you're going back into.
Oh, great. Okay.
But I think the habit of getting into backdating is always a great thing.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any other questions on fixing or backdating? All right. To Amy's question about entering data as and backdating. You want to make sure that every single time that you enter any piece of data that you are entering it in the correct project and in the correct date. So if you are entering project data that's other than your default, and you'll know what your default is because right here at the top you will see one. I am shadowing Peg right now, that's why it looks the way it does. So Peg's default is rapid rehousing for VHSP. If she goes to then enter data for any project other than rapid rehousing, right here at the top is a button for enter data as, and she is now able to switch the project in which she is entering data for. So if she's actually trying to put in some notes for someone who is in one of the COVID hotels, she can switch to that person and then enroll them. Backdating is to tell the system the information was collected on this date. So for Amy's question, maybe you did an intake last week and you want to enter the data today. You would then backdate to last week's day so that you can tell the system that it is tied to the 20th and not the 24th. The reason why these two things are so important is because most of the time when I get a question on, I just put data in and I can't see it, is because you did not put data in the right project or under the right date, or your ROI, your release of information, does not cover that project or that date. So if you actually want to see the data that you're supposed to see, those two things are critical to be able to tell the system where to tie the data to. You will always know that you are in backdate if this is yellow at the top. At any point, if you are entering someone into a project and you are changing the provider or changing the date on either the entry, the exit, or the update, then you know you are not in the right project or backdated. These should auto-populate with what you've set the system to, and the only thing that you should have to select is type. Is there any questions about backdating or enter data as? If you go to enter data as and you do not have access to a project that you're trying to enter data for, please email Aisha or I, and it's very easy for us to just add that group for you. So do not think just because you don't have the option that you can't do it. Just tell us that you don't have it and we'll add it for you. As you'll notice, one of the other things that we have is incorrect data being entered for someone when we go to enter them into a project. Many times this is because data for people who are already in the system populates over. And so it looks like you filled in all of the boxes, but really you filled in all the boxes with the information from their last record. So if you were to save this, this is actually not accurate for your current stay. So one thing in particular is client location. Client location is always Fredericksburg because that's where all of our projects are. Many times this gets saved and we are still putting people in other projects, which means they don't even get counted on my reports unless I figure out that they're not counted and I go in and change them for every single person. Other things that are populating that probably aren't accurate for your project are things around prior living situation. So again, prior living situation is where they were the night before they stayed in the project you're enrolling them in, and then their chronic homeless questions. If these populate over, they may not actually tell the story of where they were today, but where they were 3 months ago, and that's not accurate for what you're telling. Especially for chronic homeless questions, which are used in our prioritization scoring, which we determine who receives housing with that information. It's really important to make sure that this data is correct, to make sure that everyone's getting the services that they are requesting or needing. Is there any questions about pre-populating data? All right. We talked a little bit about prior living situation just a second ago. Just to review your options for those. If you are running a shelter project, you want to know where did they sleep the night before they slept in your bed. What's really important is where they slept the night before, not where they slept a majority of the nights before. So if you have someone who usually sleeps outside, but the night before they happen to find someone's couch to sleep on, then you want to make sure that you put someone's couch as their prior living situation, as that was the night prior. For any other projects, it's where was the person living prior to the project enrollment. So if you have someone who's in rapid rehousing, usually it's either shelter or outside. For any other kind of prevention projects or something like that, you might have a house situation, but it's wherever they are before they get enrolled in your project. So any questions about prior living situation? I will just reiterate that the length of stay in previous place ties to prior living situation. So if you're answering this question, you want to look at the prior living situation and ask how long they were there. So if you're saying that they, before I came to your shelter, were outside, it's how long were you outside before coming to the shelter. . All right, the next 4 questions on here have to do with chronic homelessness. The best way to answer these questions is not to ask the person these questions directly, but to have it as a conversation and then you answer the questions. If I go up to somebody and say, what was the approximate date your homelessness started? I'm going to get all sorts of strange answers. I've heard people say, well, they've been homeless since they were 18 and they're now 56. That's fine in their eyes if they think that they've been homeless, but really what we're talking about is this episode and this HUD definition. So that's why I always suggest that if you can have it as a conversation, have it as a conversation. So you would ask, where did you sleep last night? And how long did you sleep there? And before that, where were you? And for how long? And before that, and for how long? And before that, and for how long? And so on. And you go back the 3 years. I know that seems like a long time because it is, but that's the requirement. And so get the best kind of timeline that you can for the past 3 years, and then you actually go in and make the decision about what is the answers to these 3 questions. So for episodes of homelessness, we are looking at breaks in homelessness. We do have a cheat sheet we'll send you along with the slides that details all of these, but a break in homelessness means 7 nights or more in some kind of permanent housing situation, basically a sheltered situation in which they paid for themselves or they stayed with a friend or something, or 90 days in an institution. And so in looking at their timeline, you would look for all the breaks and then measure the episodes from there. So for the first question, the approximate date homelessness started, you're looking for the last or the first night that they were in the current episode in which they are in. And then you're also then going to use your episode timeline to count the number of times that someone has been homeless. So how many episodes have they had in the last 3 years, including this one? And then the final one is the number of months. If I added how many months each episode were up, how much do I get? The thing about months, which is tricky, is that 1 day in a month is counted as a full month. So if someone says, I've been homeless since January 15th, you would count January, February, March. They've been homeless 3 months. The options only go up to 12 or more. So if you get to 12, you can stop counting. But it's these 3 questions together that help us understand if someone is currently chronically homeless and affects their information on their final prioritization score for the community. Is there any questions about chronic homelessness, what's a break in homelessness, or how you actually go about calculating that?
Sam, could you just reiterate? I'm sorry, I hope somebody else asked questions besides me, but I'll keep asking questions. So approximate date homelessness started, I just realized I've been doing that wrong. So I just did an intake a couple days ago for William Miller, and I put approximate date as like he reported January 1st, 2017 was when his wife kicked him out. But I should do it the most recent episode, not originally.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if he had stayed somewhere, if he was in an institution for 90 days at some point since 2017, or in some kind of permanent housing situation for more than 7 nights since 2017, then he has had a break, and you actually need to calculate it from his last break.
Okay, great. I'll go back and fix that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anyone else have questions on that? The next largest issue comes from sub-assessments. When I say sub-assessments, I'm talking about these boxes here. The 4 boxes are for income, benefits, insurance, and disabilities. One of the biggest things is making sure that you have answered every available option, not just the options in which the person has. And so how we want to go about that is using these HUD verification buttons. The instinct is always to use the add button. I'll just add what their income is and the question will be answered, but HUD actually makes us make sure that there is an answer for every question. So do not hit add. If you hit the red option, it will actually tell you which questions are not answered. This is a brand new client. You can actually hit no for all of them and then select the ones that are yeses. Most people don't have 15 things of income, so usually that's a easier way to do it. If you've done it correctly, you'll see that this actually turns to a check mark, knowing that you've answered all the questions. If you then later in a update need to change their income, you will look for which income you are changing. You can use the magnifying glass to show you all your options. But you would change the one that you want to change. Always set it for the day before you're setting the new one. And then you're able to actually go forward with changing it to the other one. This will change back to a caution sign letting you know that you no longer have every question answered and you need to answer the question. Is there any question on the sub-assessments? Also, as a reminder, there is 2 questions sometimes that come along with each of the sub-assessments, which is this yes or no question. So it's saying, is there any income? And then no, and then you have to re-put in no for everything. Or yes, there is, and then you tell them which ones. Some of them have this 3rd question where they're asking for totals, but just know sometimes the yes or no question doesn't always match the answers that you guys have in your sub-assessments. You might put, no, they don't have cash benefit, and then tell me that they have SNAP down here. So sometimes it throws some wonky things, and I know it's repetitive, but that's one thing to make sure that you're checking as well. So any questions about those? All right. For our housing projects, one of the most common problems that we have is around residential move-in date, and making sure that our project dates and our residential move-in dates are correct. So for most housing projects, you are usually enrolled in some other kind of project prior to your enrollment in a RAPID or PSH project. You're either working with street case management or you are working with a shelter provider before you go into housing. And so these are the only 2 times in which, this is the only time in which you should have dual enrollment in projects. You can have a dual enrollment for a shelter or a street outreach project, and then also for a permanent housing project. Being enrolled at the same time in 2 shelters doesn't make sense. Being enrolled 2 times at the same time for 2 housing projects isn't allowed. But the dual enrollment for shelter and a housing project is. And so we talked about shelter, that the start date for shelter is the first night that they sleep in your bed, but what's the first night that they're in your RAPID project? And so for RAPID or housing any other permanent housing project. It's really making sure that there's 3 things met, which is they've agreed to services, that they're eligible for services, they've agreed to services, and you're able to serve them in a short period of time. I know that the last one's a little bit vague, but you can make the decision about what that actually means. But once those 3 are set, mostly it's the day in which they're assigned through prioritization, or that you take them on as you're going to house them is your start date for your permanent housing. You'll have your shelter and your rapid housing running simultaneously until they move in. And so if I put a move-in date for my rapid project, I should also see the same date probably for the shelter project. So they left the shelter project and moved into housing. Your housing move-in date is not their lease signing date. It is the first date they slept in their new housing. So I have had people who have signed a lease on the 1st, but did not move in until the 5th because they didn't have a bed to sleep in, and so they stayed at the shelter for another 5 days. So your 5th is your move-in date, not the 1st, because you signed the lease on the 1st. It should also be probably pretty rare that your start date and your housing move-in date for rapid or PSH is the same day. There's some weird things where you switch funding and things like that where they are, but for the most part, people brand new to a housing project have some time between they start working with a case manager to obtain housing, they're going through housing location, all of those things, and then they actually move in. So you want to make sure that you're capturing the full time that it actually takes for someone to locate and obtain their housing. This goes back to the example Aisha showed earlier about the 6 days. Probably doesn't take us 6 days to find housing and move someone in. It takes a lot longer than that, but we weren't accurately capturing how long we were actually working with someone prior to moving them in. Is there any questions on housing move-in dates or project start dates? Right. The last thing that I want to talk about is client destinations, and that's when we actually exit people from projects. In our community, exits to unknown destinations is very high. I am completely aware that there are things that come along with people staying in shelter, people disappear, people don't tell you where they're going, but the rates in which our community has them has been an issue for a number of years now. So I wanted to make sure that we go over what destinations and how you have a conversation with someone about where they're going. If someone is in your project and they decide to leave, you want to make every best effort that you have to figure out where they are going. For shelters, I've seen this be successful to say, I see that you would like to leave, or you even have to exit someone from your shelter. I want to make sure that you have the resources that you need in leaving. Can you tell me where you are going after you leave here? Having a conversation in that way will get you a better result than not having the conversation at all, or saying that they disappeared. Most times you might have people who, especially street outreach, don't come back. You have people who leave for an appointment and don't come back or whatever from shelter, but any last-ditch effort you can make for trying to figure out their destination. So I wanted to go over just a few and what they mean. Client doesn't know means you ask the question and you try to work with them about where they're going to go, and they absolutely have no idea. That is the only time in which client doesn't know should be selected, is after all of your conversations, they still don't know where they're going to go. For client refused, it should be, I know exactly where I'm going, but I'm not going to tell you, and they refuse to actually give you the location. That should be the only time that you use client refused. Data not collected means that you chose not to ask the question even though you had the opportunity to ask it, which is different from no exit interview completed. No exit interview completed means I never even got the option to talk to them or to complete an interview. They disappeared. And so no exit interview was completed. For data not collected means I completed the interview, I just never asked them where they were going. It should be very rare that you use this. You usually have the option of they don't know, they refused, or I wasn't able to ask them, but having an interview and never asking the question should be very rare. Everything else on here is a logical answer for different situations. We have added over the years multiple options for rental housing. So GPD should only be used for veterans. HCV is housing choice voucher, so that should only be for people who actually receive a Section 8 housing choice voucher, which I can say in our community is also very rare. RRH is if they went with rapid. BASH, again, should only be used for veterans, as that is a veteran PSH project. In our community, we have no safe haven, so unless they move to another area that has safe havens, this should never be selected. If they have some other kind of ongoing subsidy that's not in one of these buckets, then you would use the other ongoing housing subsidy. And then if they're not having any subsidy, but they are going into a rental, there's an option for those. For staying with family or friends, there's two options for permanent versus temporary. I often get the question about what's temporary and what's permanent. There is no hard and fast rule, so use your best judgment. Basically, the example that I give often is if someone says, Mom said I could stay for 2 weeks, that seems pretty temporary for me. If they say, Mom said I could stay until I figure it out, whether that ends up actually being the truth or not, Mom says I can stay until I figure it out is a permanent situation. I would not worry too much about what's temporary and what's permanent. Our goal is always permanent housing. We want people to stabilize and stay stabilized in permanent housing, but that's not always the case for every person who leaves us. And temporary options have been the option that it took to get them to permanent housing. For instance, detox is considered a temporary housing, but sometimes detox is what someone needs in order to come out and go into permanent housing. Jail is considered a temporary option, but sometimes that's what people need in order to come out and go into permanent housing. So really it's based on the information that you have and what you can report at the time, not so much about what looks good on a report. So don't worry about that. Even if it ends up not being the case and they end up coming back and it wasn't permanent, you said that it was, it's not a big deal. It's about what you knew at the time, and that's the information that you had. Is there any questions about destinations or permanent versus temporary or any of the other options for unknown destinations? The final thing that I just wanted to mention was annual assessment. All of our projects, if you have someone who is in your project for over a year, requires an annual assessment. The screen looks very similar to the update screen. You actually get to it the same way. You're just going to click annual assessment over update. Maybe. And so the screen has the same things. It'll only show you the things that you can update, but you have to list it as an annual assessment to say that you made concerted effort at least once a year to review their information. And then it must be completed within 30 days of their project start date, especially for rapid projects. This is really important. If you enroll someone today and they don't move in till May, you still next March have to do an annual assessment. You will not wait until a year from when they moved in. You are waiting a year from their actual start date with your project. So it's based on this project start date that's in here. I think for most projects, other than Rapid, they are year long. Well, other than PSH and a few Rapid folks, there's very few people that actually spend an entire year with us in one project. But if you need help running a report for those, we're happy to run those so that you have them. But you have a grace period of about 30 days before and after. So if someone starts a project in January 1st, you have in between December 2nd of this year and January 31st of next year to complete their annual assessment. So you have a 60-day window to actually do it. But it has to be around their project start date. Is there any questions about annual assessments? So those are the major issues that we usually see that throw off reports. I'm going to pause. If there is any other questions regarding data entry at this point that you guys would like to talk about, or any other circumstances that have come up that have been difficult to fix, or that you've been dealing with. So the last thing that I will say is HUD comes out with new data standards. Do you ever ask yourself, why do we make you answer all the questions that you do? It's because HUD requires us to receive funding from them, which means the state requires us to receive funding from them. But they come out with regular new standards. The next standards are set to come out in October. There were no new standards for this past October, especially with COVID. But new standards will come out in October. Any changes that will affect you on a drastic scale, we will send out emails and any additional training that you may need to make sure that you are prepared to start implementing those as of October. But if there are any questions, again, Aisha is a great resource to please reach out to. I'm happy to take any questions now. Promised you it would be less than 3 hours. We were able to accomplish this in 1 hour and 5 minutes, so thank you so much. This is your treat. You get 2 hours back of your day. But if there's any other questions that you have, we are happy to take these now.